So I wanted to, you said some people were reading, excuse me, my book in a study group, I guess, and it'd be nice to talk about this again. I haven't been dealing with these teachings in a while. So I thought I'd talk about how I came to write this and what it's about, and hopefully you got some questions. I'd love to answer and interact with anybody who's got something they want to talk about. Um, so this book starts. Hmm, so this.
To advance, just hit the left and right arrow.
Oh, it's left and right. No,
Go right first.
those are not advancing.
It's doing weird stuff.
Oh,
No.
so what did you
Okay,
what
I
did you
just
do?
clicked.
What did you click the
I
pen?
just tapped, yeah. But
Yeah,
there you
that's
go.
right.
There you go.
Okay.
Okay.
So the tech always does something like that. It's always ready to zap you. So this book was inspired by some talks that I heard by my teacher, Reb Anderson. And maybe some of you know Reb, I don't know. He's with the abbot at the San Francisco Zen Center for quite a few years. And he's a wonderful teacher, a very kind of a brilliant thinker. And we were talking during the break about uh, Dharma adapting to the West. And Reb has been really one of the great, I think, thinkers and kind of going through some of the ideas of how these ancient, Buddhist teachings and Buddhist texts apply to modern living and modern life. And he gave a series of talks on a sutra called the Samdhinirmochana Sutra. And this is a great sutra because a lot of people can't pronounce the name, so you can impress people when you say it, And I found that it took me about 6 months to actually pronounce it, but I got it now. Um, it's not even really that well known. You've probably heard of like the Heart Sutra and some of these other famous ones, but it's a really very pivotal sutra, and really just amazing. And Reb gave talks about this sutra for 4 or 5 years, just again and again, and
What's
because
the
it's
name of it again?
the Samdhinirmochana hero.
I don't remember that.
You can see the small print down here, the wisdom of the Samdhinirmochana Sutra.
What does that mean?
It, well, there's different translations. Untying the knot, sutra explaining the implicit meaning, the hidden meaning of the teachings. That's why there's not really one consensus translation. So that's why I usually use the Sanskrit term. But what the idea behind this sutra is that in the Buddhist teachings, there appear to be these contradictions. You get these early teaching of the Eightfold Noble Path, and then you get these later teachings, and they're really different. So this sutra is trying to explain or untie the knot or explain the hidden meaning of the teachings that might not be clear. So I listened to these. I was involved in listening to a lot of these talks that Reb gave, although he gave them all over the place. And eventually he came up, actually, in those days, he would give retreats for us up here once in a while, or down here, I guess, for him. And I asked him if I could work on putting those, talks together into a book. And he agreed, and he actually had some people at the White Heron Sun, up in Green Gulch and some of the other places at San Francisco Zen Center transcribed the talks. And so I ended up with a pile of about 900 pages of these transcribed talks. And then at one point, I remember sitting down and thinking, oh my, what have I let myself into? I can't do this. But eventually, I did got it together, and this was the result. A book called The Third Turning of the Wheel, and then the subtitle's The Wisdom of the Samdhinirmochana Sutra. And what this is an edited version of all these talks that Reb gave on in this wonderful sutra. And if you want to dive into some really a deep and profound Dharma, I would highly recommend this. It's not easy reading, and Reb is brilliant in the way that Zen teachers tend to be. Say something and then contradict it in the next step, and you end up scratching your head trying to figure out what he's talking about. And but in a way, that's kind of the intent. It's not meant to be something nice and easy. It's meant to kind of be, um, well, it is profound and deep and really almost impossible to understand. And it's when you give up understanding that you start to get it. So anyway, I helped edit this book, and then I thought more and more about all these great teachings. And one of the teachings in this book is this idea that there are three turnings of the wheel of Dharma. And of course, that's the title of this talk. And the idea was that you can understand the Buddhist teachings as being in three different turnings of the wheel, three different approaches. Okay. And that this is a really powerful way I found to look at the teachings. And so I worked and went back and reread all the important sutras, all the English translations at least, and just kind of put them together under this framework of the three turnings. And that's what the book uses. Um, and that idea comes from the Sandhi Nirmochana Sutra. Uh, the three turnings of the wheel of Dharma. And so just to kind of summarize what that's all about and what the three turnings are, we'll start with the first turning, and you probably have read the book or other people use this terminology. The first turnings are from the most ancient teachings of the Buddha. Um, they come down to us mainly in what's called the Pali Canon. Most of you have heard of the Pali Canon, have you? Yeah. It's a series of text. They call them suttas in Pali. They're also known as sutras in Sanskrit, same thing. Uh, and these are they're not actually the direct words of the Buddha. What they are is after the Buddha died, his monks got together and followers got together and had these meetings, and I'm sure there were endless meetings, and tried to decide what he said and come with some agreement. And then they set about memorizing them. And then for 300 years, they passed along these great teachings. They're what were basically the memories of the monks had of what the Buddha said. And the Buddha never saw anything in the Pali Canon. He never wrote any of these texts, and he never saw them. He never approved them. So we don't really know, how accurate they are. They're probably pretty accurate, we would assume, but there are probably some distortions there too. I mean, and so I'm always very kind of open about, well, did the Buddha really say this? And the answer is, well, who knows? But what we do know is these are great, wonderful, and powerful teachings that have brought enormous benefit to vast numbers of people over the centuries. And to me, it doesn't really matter exactly, is it historically accurate? There's no way to even know that. And to me, that's not the point. The point is the wisdom that these teachings have. And they certainly have that. Okay. So to talk about the Pali Canon, I think you know a lot about it already, and isn't the time here to go over all these original teachings. But the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Noble Path, those are probably the most central of the Pali Canon teachings. And I think you've, I'm sure, heard of those and practiced those and thought about those. So I'm not going to go back and talk about those here. I do go over in the book, of course, but what I do want to mention is there's a certain kind of approach in the early teachings, and Reb points this out in his analysis of all this. And as these these teachings are very logical, they're very systematic, and the underlying idea is that there is this, suffering, and that there's a certain path you follow, and then when you follow this path, you reach liberation, nirvana, right? And that's really what the Four Noble Truths are about. It's like a doctor's prescription. It's very logical, very systematic. There's a problem, a disease, suffering. There's a cause of suffering, which is clinging. There is a way clinging can be cured, and the way you cure it is by following the Eightfold Noble Path. And of course, that, to give the super summary of that, involves three things: ethical behavior, compassionate understanding behavior, meditation, and wisdom, pursuit of wisdom. And if you do that, you will see your spirituality mature, and eventually you'll reach liberation and nirvana, and you'll be freed from all suffering, and you will no longer be reborn back into this world of suffering. Okay, the end of rebirth. So that's kind of the essence of these teachings. And as Reb points out, it's a very logical, systematic, rational approach, which implies, certain ways of doing things. And I think that's why these teachings are so popular today in the West, because we have a very rational, systematic kind of thinking, and we're into science. And these teachings are very compatible with that, very rational, scientific. Here's what you do. And as you know, the Buddha didn't say just accept this on faith. He said, well, do this stuff and see what happens. Be empirical, try it out. But about the same time, they actually started writing down these texts, and writing. You see the Pali Canon written down about 3 or 4 centuries after the Buddha died. About that same time, these new texts start showing up. We might call them the Mahayana Sutra, the Great Vehicle Sutras. Remember, a sutra is just a text. So these new sutras start showing up, and they're pretty different. Okay. And some of these sutras may have been based on what the Buddha said, but they were just teachings that weren't accepted when they had these conferences to decide what to put in the canon, because they had these big meetings. You can imagine how bureaucratic that was, and everyone would argue about, which teachings are real, which ones we put in. So these may have been just some that were carried on outside of those conferences, quite likely. But probably some of them were just sort of new as well. And so we don't really know where these sutras came from. Traditionally they would say, well, they were teachings of the Buddha that just were not known. But who knows? We don't really know. And in those days and times, you had to say it came from the Buddha, or they wouldn't have any kind of authority. And there are these Mahayana sutras that arose. There are a huge number. There are thousands of them. And not only that, but some of them are enormously long, like the Avatamsaka Sutra, which has been translated into English. And the English version is 1,600 pages.
Wow.
And that's it. Yeah. And it has a whole chapter full of numbers. It's just kind of interesting. It's quite a read. It's the kind of thing you can read from now for as long as you live. Just open it up and read something. In any case, I certainly did not read all those sutras, or even all the English translations of all those sutras. But what I tried to do is read the key ones, because fortunately, some of them are really famous and influential, and they're kind of the central ones. And so we'll talk about some of these key ones that everyone recognizes were key. So let's look then at this next set of teachings. And many of these sutras were devotional sutras. They were about, Pure Land Buddhism, where they recite the name of Amitabha Buddha. So a lot of those were Pure Land sutras, or texts about, various kinds of rituals and things. So they weren't really that relevant. But there was this body of sutras called the Prajnaparamita. And that in Sanskrit means the perfection of wisdom. And this group of sutras, sometimes called the Prajnaparamita literature, revolutionized Buddhism. It really was just really revolutionary. In fact, there's a story in one of the Prajnaparamita sutras, and there's a whole bunch of them from 10,000 lines to one syllable. The Heart Sutra is one of those. And there's a story in there where the Buddha first gave the Prajnaparamita teachings, and some of the monks ran out screaming, and other ones fell down and vomited blood and died. Now we assume that that's metaphorical. They probably didn't vomit blood and died, but it was really shocking. These teachings were really something very revolutionary about it. And by the way, it says she who has gone beyond, because Prajnaparamita is also sometimes visualized as a goddess. It's the name of Buddhist, not a goddess, but a bodhisattva. And this is a very beautiful, famous statue of Prajnaparamita that's from Indonesia. It's not Indonesian. And say she who has gone behind, because Prajna means wisdom. Paramita means either perfection, or sometimes it's translated as the summit or the highest point. So you can translate it either as wisdom, or sometimes wisdom beyond wisdom, the perfection of wisdom. Or you can also translate it as she who has gone beyond, because paramita is feminine, the ita, ida, Indian is feminine. And here she is, physical form as a bodhisattva. So what do these Prajnaparamita teachings say? Well, I think the oldest of these is the Diamond Sutra, which arises about the first century CE, BCE, before the Common Era, about 1 century BC, and about the same time they're writing down the Pali Canon, the Diamond Sutra appears. So of all of these Mahayana sutras, this is probably the one that is most likely to be based on the really ancient teachings. But of course, we don't really know. And there's some really amazing stuff in the sutra. There's one paragraph that I think is particularly profound, and I'm going to just read a couple sentences out of this one paragraph. And yet these few sentences in this one paragraph really turn the Buddhist world upside down in a lot of ways, or at least reflect this kind of revolution. So I thought I'd give you a little piece of this. So it begins, as a lot of sutras do, with saying, thus have I heard, and the Buddha comes and he's giving a sermon, and one of his disciples, in this case it was Subhuti, the great disciple of Buddha in the Mahayana teachings. Subhuti walks up and bows to the Buddha and says, and asks the Buddha a question, as they would do at these great conferences. And he says, great teacher, what should someone who wishes to follow the bodhisattva path and attain complete enlightenment do to master his mind? Okay, so what should a bodhisattva, and this means someone following the Buddhist path, what should the bodhisattva do to master his mind? Okay, and attain complete enlightenment. And the Buddha says some very interesting things. Up to this point, the goal in the early teachings was to attain enlightenment. And Subhuti obviously is following the original teaching. There's a path, there's a goal, which is liberation. I'll follow the path, I'll get enlightened and be liberated. But the Buddha, in his response, says something different. He says, Subhuti, those who would follow the bodhisattva path should give birth to the following thought. However many beings there are, in whatever realms of beings that might exist, whether they are born from an egg or a womb, from air or water, whether they have form or not, whether they think or not, or do not think, or do neither, so in other words, all beings, everything, I shall liberate them all. Okay, so the goal here in the path is not that you get liberated, it's that you help everybody else. And the goal of the path is to serve other people, to be of benefit to being. And this is a real turning point. Now, the goal is not now to have nirvana and just, stop being reborn. You have to keep coming back again and again until every single being in every realm of existence is liberated, which I take to be a pretty long time. Okay. So this is a very different attitude. So this is, and in the Pali text, they use the word bodhisattva, but it only applied to the Buddha before he became a Buddha, before he was enlightened. In the Mahayana teachings, the bodhisattva now is an enlightening being. It's a path. It's a goal. And in a way, it's a goal that doesn't, a path that the goal is, there's a goal, but it's really unreachable if liberation only comes after you liberate every single being everywhere in all realms. Obviously that's something that's not going to be very close. But if this isn't bad enough, if this isn't much of a shock, then he goes on and drops a real bombshell. What's the real bombshell? In the next line he says, And when this innumerable, immeasurable, infinite number of beings has been liberated, no beings in truth have been liberated. So no matter how many beings you liberate, no beings have been liberated. Okay, what do you make out of this? I mean, this is like radical wisdom. And he goes on and gives you a little hint. He kind of has a little mercy after that. And he says, okay, well, why is this so, Subhuti? If someone believes in the idea of a self, of a person, of a being, or a life, that person is not a bodhisattva. In other words, essentially, there really aren't any beings. There's no self, there's no being. This idea that we're all separated, that's not true. See, how could you liberate something that doesn't exist? But again, yeah, these are teachings that you don't understand intellectually, really. I mean, you're not going to really figure this out and take notes and go to the cliff version. You just kind of let this sink in, and but it's a radical turn now in the path that Buddhism is taking. This idea of wisdom beyond wisdom, I guess we could say. Oh, by the way, this is a copy of the Diamond Sutra from the 6th century, which is one of the oldest ones we have. And in fact, the very first printed book, in China with the car printed was a copy of the Diamond Sutra. It was, the very first printed book. It was much later than this. It was a long ways off, but kind of interesting. Okay, so now let's go to the other really famous text from these Prajnaparamita teachings, and that's the Heart Sutra. And I imagine a lot of you have heard of the Heart Sutra. I imagine you've heard it chanted. It's probably the most famous of any sutra in the Buddhist canon. And I would venture to guess that as I speak right now, somebody somewhere in the world is chanting the Heart Sutra. I think there's no doubt. Because hundreds of millions of people do it. And in Zen, if you've ever gone to a Zen service, every day they chant this again and again and again. And chanting it itself is kind of a meditation practice. And all these little words here on the screen, I downloaded that somewhere. I ran across that, stuck it on here. It's little chunks out of this Heart Sutra. And what this is, the full name might be the Heart of the Prajnaparamita Sutras. Sometimes in Zen, they call it the Wisdom Beyond Wisdom Sutra, which I really like, Wisdom Beyond Wisdom. What this is, probably, scholars would say, is a kind of a summary. Because there are all these Prajnaparamita Sutras. There's the one in 20,000 lines, which is really long, hundreds of pages. There's one in 10,000 lines. There's one in 8,000 lines, 1,000 lines. And this one is just one page. Okay. And it summarizes all these great teachings in really something you can memorize and recite every day. And that may seem impossible, but there's amazing wisdom in the sutra. And there's a lot of things if you chant it a lot, you don't understand what's in there. A lot of people just kind of do it by rote, and that's great, I think. But there's all kinds of subtle things you might not get. So I want to point out a couple of things. We'll just go through at least some of this little sutra, the Heart Sutra. And of course, there's lots of different translations, and the English versions vary quite a bit. So you may have heard it in slightly different wording than this one has. There really isn't one version everybody necessarily agrees on. And there's actually there's also a longer version that has an intro and a conclusion that is often not given. So it begins describing Avalokiteshvara. I don't know if you've heard of Avalokiteshvara. He's the bodhisattva of compassion, and a great cosmic, powerful bodhisattva. And he's meditating. He's Avalokiteshvara, practicing deeply the Prajnaparamita, saw the emptiness of all 5 skandhas and sundered the bonds that caused him suffering. So it's chanted, so it often has a rhythm to it. It's really, if you chant it in a group, it's really nice to do that. So Avalokiteshvara, this great bodhisattva, he's practicing deeply the Prajnaparamita. That means he's meditating. He's practicing the perfection of wisdom, which is a kind of meditation. He saw clearly the emptiness of all five skandhas. Now, what does that mean? You may know, does anybody know what the skandhas are? Heard that from, what's a skandha?
Feeling.
Form, feeling, perception. You know, there are these five heaps, these five groups of things that make up a human. So they are like all these kind of groups of events that occur in our mind streams that, like form, perception, sensation, and so on. So it's basically everything. When they say all five skandhas are empty, he's saying everything is empty. And then some translations say it sundered the bonds that caused him suffering or relieved all pain and misfortune. Different ways you can put that in English. And then the most famous lines coming up, and I know most of you have heard this. Oh, Shariputra, form is no other than emptiness. Emptiness no other than form. Form is exactly emptiness. Emptiness is exactly form. Sensation, conception, discrimination, awareness are like this, also like this. So Shariputra was one of the greatest disciples of the Buddha, and he shows up in the Pali Canon a lot. So in a way, this sutra is saying, well, listen up, follower of the Pali Canon. This is, form is emptiness. And we'll see why he's saying this in a minute. Now, what does it mean to say form is emptiness, emptiness is form? Well, do you have a lifetime to think about this? There's all kinds of words and explanations we can come up with this, but it's also a kind of thing you might just reflect on in your meditation sometimes. Just, when you meditate, just think form, all this form is empty. And yet all this emptiness is everything that occurs. Everything is empty and everything arises from emptiness. And just sit with that, feel that and recognize that, because that's the point, and we'll see in the third tree, they explicitly say that, but all the words aren't the point. Then it goes on, O Shariputra, all dharmas are forms of emptiness. A dharma is a moment, and this dharma has two meanings. Dharma is like a teaching with a capital D, but with a small D, it also means a moment of existence. They have this theory that existence is a bunch of just one moment after another, and those are dharmas. So these are moments. So basically, all moments of existence, everything that exists, is emptiness. They are not born, they're not destroyed, they're not stained, they're not pure, they're without loss and without gain. Now, of course, normally we think that phenomenon have a beginning, a middle, and an end. But the sutra is saying, no, they're not born, they're not destroyed, they're not stained, they don't need to be purified. They're not purified, though. There's no loss, there's no gain. Profound and confusing wisdom. And then we go on to even more surprising topics. And I don't know if anybody wanted to stop for a second here. I know I'm just powering through all this stuff.
I'm ready to fall on the floor and start vomiting blood.
Please don't. If you're going to do that, the vomit is over there in the back corner.
In the bathroom.
Yeah. Do it in the bathroom. Well, you can see why monks were pretty upset, some of them. But it gets more upsetting. It gets way more upsetting for the monks. You haven't begun to hear it because it goes on now. So in emptiness, so when you're contemplating emptiness and you're resting in the awareness of emptiness, there is no form, okay? No sensation, conception, discrimination, awareness. That's the skandhas. No eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, or mind. That's your sense organs. No color, sound, taste, smell, touch, or phenomena. That's the objects of your sense organs. And there's an eye, and there's color, and so on. No realm of sight, no realm of consciousness. And then it goes, no ignorance and no end to ignorance. No old age and death, and no end to old age and death. And here's where it gets really surprising. And this is buried in the middle. A lot of people just pass over it and never kind of latch onto this. There's no suffering, no cause of suffering, no extinguishing of suffering, no path, no wisdom, and no gain. So when it says there's no suffering, what is he talking about? That's the first noble truth. There is no cause of suffering. That's the second noble truth. No, that doesn't exist. Uh, can it be ended? No, there's no end to suffering. And there's no path. There's no Eightfold Noble Path. That's what that means. There's no Eightfold Noble Path. Okay, so here is the teaching of the great Bodhisattva Avalokitesvara, basically saying that the Four Noble Truths and all the Buddha's teachings are empty. They don't mean a thing. Forget about it. This is really radical stuff here, and people don't realize how radical stuff. This is like in the Bible, at the end it would say, oh, by the way, there's no God and no Jesus and there's no salvation. I really wish it did say that, you know, because every religion, I think, should have a Heart Sutra. Don't you think? To say, whoa, let me think about this. And then it goes on. Thus, with no gain, the Bodhisattva lives prajnaparamita, or sometimes realizes prajnaparamita, with no hindrance in the mind, no hindrance, therefore no fear, far beyond all deluded thoughts. This is nirvana. All past and present and future Buddhas live in prajnaparamita and therefore attain unsurpassed perfect enlightenment, which doesn't exist. Right. So you can see how difficult these contradictions are. And in a way, to explain them is kind of to, as Bob Dylan once said of a dream, shovel them into the ditch of what they mean. You know? It's maybe better not to try to understand what they mean, but of course we always do, and our rational minds want to grab hold of these things. So let me say a little bit about that. But before I do, anyone want to advance? Why would Avalokitesvara deny all the Buddhist doctrine? Because it's helped so many people, and he really believes in them. Yeah.
Any possibility referring to everything we experience is just an illusion?
Well, that's one way to looking at it. Yeah. But then there's no illusion either. Remember that. Well, there's different ways to explain this. What Reb Anderson, my wonderful teacher, said, and I think it's really true, is that these wonderful teachings, the Eightfold Path and the Four Noble Truths, these were amazing, wonderful teachings. And this is not to denigrate these teachings. Many people today really follow these with great devotion. And it's wonderful. And they help many, many people to liberation, and they relieve enormous amounts of suffering. We don't even know how much. But people started getting attached to these teachings. They started to think, oh, this is the truth. And, if you don't believe in these teachings, or if you have some other idea about what the path is, you're wrong and I'm right. And, they clung on to these teachings. And when they say these monks threw up, it's because they spent their whole life following this path, and they were very, very, very invested in this is the truth, and this is the way, and this is what we have to do. And so what Reb says is, well, then these teachings were to blast you out of your complacency, to shake you out of your fixed ideas, and to open your mind to the way things are, which is not your ideas of the way things are. It's just the way things are. Okay. So, as I say, I'd love for other religions to have their own Heart Sutras, but they haven't come around. That's one of the reasons I love Buddhism so much. There is this kind of crazy element in it. Okay, so that's the second turning, and I don't know if you guys want to comment or have any questions about that before I get into the third. Yeah.
Well, just at the end of this, it brings to mind the parable of the raft, where the
Okay.
told one of his followers that at a certain point, once you get across the river, you don't keep dragging the raft around. You cast it aside and move on, as it were. I think actually, though, that was a polycanon teaching, so it's really part of the first wheel, but it foreshadows the
Yes.
second turning, which is based on emptiness, and to detach
Yeah.
from the teachings as being the object. That's not the object of hope. That's the finger pointing.
Exactly. And that's a good point. In the Polycanon, you can find implicitly these teachings. Like you say, this teaching of, the Buddha asked you, well, what do you use a raft for? You get across the river. And when you get across, that's the teachings, When you get across the other side, you don't carry the raft around with you. You put it down. You don't need those teachings anymore, you know. And he said that in originally. So
Yeah.
this is very much in the spirit of his teachings, although maybe not. I think it was more for the way they were kind of ossified and formalized. And you know how it is as a sociologist. Whenever the great teacher, charismatic leader dies, there's a crisis. And then because you can't go to the Buddha and ask him. So now you have to write it down and formalize it, and you get texts and you get structure and you get hierarchy and that's that can be a problem. It preserves the teachings and it's necessary, but it can be a problem.
I found in this book that Rochelle loaned me, which is your book, and she had this page marker in it. I looked
Okay.
at it, and it is it's an homage to the Heart Sutra, and I underlined this one sentence. It's
Okay.
therefore Shariputra, because bodhisattvas have no attainment, since there is nothing to attain.
Right.
Right out of the Heart Sutra, they rely on and abide in the perfection of wisdom. And for me, I read that and I go, oh, that's the whole Heart Sutra. Since there's no attainment, so you rely on and abide in the perfection of wisdom. It's just a process. It's the kaleidoscope as it opens. You just be in the perfection of wisdom, and that's it.
That's great
So I just go,
understanding. Yeah.
"Man." So thank you, Rochelle.
Yeah, that's a great understanding. And the point being that it's the experience, as you say, of
Yeah,
wisdom.
it's just
It's
living
not the
in
words.
perfection of wisdom is
Yeah,
that's the path. That's
yeah, that's great. Yeah, I love that. Anybody else? Okay, well, as you can imagine, this was pretty hard. And actually, historically, it appears that these Mahayana teachings were never the dominant school in India. It was always the more traditional teachings. It was when they moved north to China and Tibet and over to Japan that when the Buddhist teachings moved up there, both of them were existing, and the Mahayana caught on much there. So in Chinese Buddhism, Japanese Buddhism, Tibetan Buddhism, these are very central teachings. In Southern Buddhism, like Tibet and Tibet,
Yeah,
excuse me, wrong country, Sri Lanka. I'm just thinking Thailand, Cambodia. Those places have Buddhism came there earlier, and that they stick with the more traditional teachings. So anyway, how do you reconcile these things? So people, of course, came along and were very confused and upset, and you know, how do we understand this? And this is where the third turning comes from. Then the idea of the third turning is a way to kind of spell out in a more rational, systematic way what these very ambiguous, mysterious, kind of Prajnaparamita teachings were about. So this is where we get back to the Sandhi Sutra then, and I'll just use this. Do I have a good picture of it? No, I don't. So in this sutra, really the idea of explaining the underlying meanings of the teachings, which is what the sutra means, what they're trying to do now, as you get the background, they're trying to rationalize and I'm going to put harmonize the first turning teachings and the second turning teaching. Okay, because they're so contradictory. So this is where they don't just leave it for you to kind of feel into, but they spell it out for you. Okay, so Reb says in a way the Prajnaparamita teachings are maybe the ultimate teaching. You can't really get beyond those teachings. They're just so hard to get hold of. So people need some more words and some more teachings and some more guidance. So the third turning teachings then provide that guidance with the realization that everything is empty. From the basic idea that everything is empty. So there's a great passage in the Samdhi Nirmochana Sutra. It's a longer sutra than some of these. It's about 120 pages in the English translation. And it's structured like a lot of these. It's a series of questions that these different people ask to the Buddha, every chapter. I mean, each chapter has a different kind of theme. And in the very early chapters, they kind of start off with the basic points. And that is there's this great I don't know if I have the chat see. No, I didn't put that slide in here, I guess. Yep. Okay. There's this uh, great bodhisattva, and another bodhisattva asked him, the bodhisattva's name is, I won't try to pronounce it in Sanskrit, it's all those double C's and stuff, called Logical Questioner. That's his translation. And he's asking the bodhisattva, his name is Pramdi Ramasarnir Nirmachana, something like that. The name is like, I don't know, 30 letters. It means the bodhisattva who explains the implicit intent of the profound doctrine. In other words, he's asking the guy who explains the doctrine. And his name is Logical Questioner. So that's a good name. You get the idea what he is, the logical questioner asking the great bodhisattva. And he hears this teaching that the great bodhisattva is giving, and it's one of these typical Prajnaparamita teachings that's very contradictory. He says, all things are of two kinds, conditioned and unconditioned, or if you will, created and uncreated. And the idea here is most things are, created, they're dependently arisen, although nirvana in the early teachings was not, so that was uncreated. And herein, conditioned things are neither conditioned nor unconditioned, and unconditioned things are neither unconditioned nor conditioned. Okay, another one of those great Prajnaparamita kind of statements. And then, of course, the logical questioner goes, whoa, what are you talking about? And so the great Bodhisattva responds, good son, the term conditioned is a provisional word invented by the Buddha. Such an imagined description does not validate a real thing. Good son, the term unconditioned is also invented from language, and it too validates nothing real. Furthermore, besides the conditioned and the unconditioned, any other expression that exists in language is the same. In other words, there are no words that capture reality. Right? Words, don't do it. These are just words. Buddha just made up the word unconditioned. Don't be hung up on it. But some people look at this as nihilism. Well, there's nothing, everything is empty. And you mentioned someone the idea of everything is just an illusion. But that's really not what they're saying in these teachings. The Buddha goes on, this does not mean, however, there is nothing being discussed. What then is the reality here? I would reply that it is a reality apart from language and realized in the perfect awakening of this translation says saints, we might say bodhisattvas or whatever, of the saints through their holy wisdom and insight and apart from all names and words. So this is really spelling out specifically what the Heart Sutra and the Prajnaparamita teachings were about. The teachings are realized in your experience, in your direct experience. They're not about words, apart from language and realized in the perfect awakening through holy wisdom and insight, apart from all names and words. Okay? So the point is, what the Heart Sutra and the teachings are getting at is don't be attached to it. Well, then why use words? Well, okay, so words are all just BS. What are you doing all this talking for? Just shut up. And that actually is a good sermon. Actually, the Buddha gave sermon where he didn't say anything. Like I saw a Rebbe give a sermon once. He got up on the podium and whacked his, he had this whisk and whacked it on the podium, and that was the sermon. Yeah.
Phrase I remember is thunderous silence.
Thunderous silence. Yeah, it's great.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, sometimes we need some words, right? We need a few words. So in the sutra, the Buddha says, or the Bodhisattva says, why use words? It is because they, that's the Buddhas, desire to lead others to realization of perfect awakening that they establish such expressions as unconditioned as verbal description. The ultimate truth of which I speak is that which is inwardly realized by the sages, while reasoning is attained. This is beyond all reason, is attained in the give and take of joint discussion among common worldly. What happened? I guess my paper.
Microsoft's trying to auto update.
Oh, you're good for Microsoft.
Yeah, I hate it when they do that.
Okay, we don't want that auto updating going on. Okay.
Whoa, that just went away. No.
You didn't really want to see this.
What the heck? What just happened?
Are we still on Zoom? It looks like we're in Zoom.
I don't know if it's, oh, you know what? I don't think it's sharing anymore. So let me find.
Well, sharing that. No, okay.
You know,
You might want to ask the,
huh.
Zoomers. Ask the
Yeah,
Zoomers.
Zoom guys, can you hear me?
We don't know.
Don't hear anything.
Screen sharing is paused. You
I
know,
might say
I'm just
that.
gonna stop
Oh, there we
and
go.
start again.
Sure.
Can you hear us?
And James, I might say there's about 5 minutes
Yeah, they
left.
can get.
Okay.
So
Uh-oh. You'll have to come back again.
We'll just play with the tech a little bit. See if I'm
yeah,
Did you?
we're not done yet. I know we're not done, but it's equal.
Here we go.
Okay. We back on you?
Yeah.
Ready?
Things in the way.
Okay, so I'm told we have 5 minutes left. So we're like, really fast. Then I can do no. So let me just say, really, this is plenty for one lifetime. We don't need to try to cram too much more in here. I think I'll just mention a couple things, and we'll have a couple of minutes for anyone who wants to say anything else. You mentioned, I think, this famous teaching from the Lankavatara Sutra, which is another of the third turning sutras, which again spells out these explicit meaning of the teachings. And this is the finger pointing at the moon teaching. And in that sutra, it actually comes from the Lankavatara Sutra. It talks about the finger, teachings being a finger pointing at the moon, enlightenment. And then it says, because people never look away from the finger of words, they never discover the true meaning beyond the finger of words. Okay? And so the Sandhi Nirmochana Sutra says, ultimate truth transcends all objects of thought and deliberation.
What was that last word?
Deliberation.
Deliberate.
There's a story in the Sandhi Nirmochana Sutra of all these monks who get together and are arguing all these doctrinal points. And the Buddha is saying stuff like, these guys don't get it. This is not what it's about. Okay, we have a few minutes left. Any comments? Yeah.
So it's another thing that you may know the answer to. So in Christianity and Muslim beliefs,
Yes.
they believe that you are helpless to help yourself and you need to relinquish to God,
Yeah.
that God will
Hmm.
save you and help you. My understanding is Buddha made it very clear that no, he's not going to help you. It's not some outside being that's going to help you. You're going to help yourself. You're going to end suffering yourself.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. The Buddhist path is a path of there is
But
a branch of Buddhism which relies on other power, but most.
so we just took Geshe Lobsang up to
Uh-huh.
the Tibetan monastery in Richmond,
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
and it's full of Tibetans.
Strangely enough, yeah.
And the walls are just covered with all this. And I'm thinking, well, which has always been bugging me. So why do they have all these deities, all these, why is there blue Tara, red, green Tara, red Tara? If there,
Did you ask him?
I asked Geshe and he gave me a deep, obscure answer that I never did take.
Okay, well, one way to look at that is those are just symbols. And in a way, if you look at a symbol of Tara being enlightened and wise, that's actually your true nature. You actually are all those deities. And it's hard for us to think of it that way. And this is a whole other thing here we're getting into. But the idea is these are symbols of what you are, and that you are not apart from those. Avalokiteshvara, the great Bodhisattva, that's your inner true Buddha nature. That's you.
So you do prostrations to blue, green Tara.
Yeah, yeah.
You do meditations
Yeah.
specifically for like Chen Mizig.
Yeah.
What I was initiated was doing the Chen Mizig
Yeah.
meditation.
That's Avalokiteshvara in Tibet.
Where you're envisioning
Yeah.
Chen Mizig right in front of you and on top of your head.
Right.
Well, that seems kind of
Well, the point is that visualizations are to help you with your own path to liberation. So it's the same idea, really, that you are on the path. It's up to you to work for your liberation. But by the idea, and again, this is way too big a topic to get
Yeah.
into right now, but the idea is that these visualizations, and for example, these people that would prostrate to the Buddha doesn't want you to prostrate to him. I mean, even to be still there, there's no point in that. Prostration is for you. That's to get over your egoism. Suzuki Roshi came with a wonderful Zen teacher, founded the Zen Center, said in Japan they had in this ritual, they bowed 3 times. He had the Americans bow 7 times. Because he says the Americans are really proud. And the point is that to humble yourself and to realize, oh, there's something that I don't get. So it's really a way of kind of weakening your ego attachment. At least that's the more subtle way to look at it.
It's not worshipful.
It's not worshiping, yeah. But this is a huge, wonderful topic. I wish we had time to really
Yeah.
jump into it. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, please come back and we will.
Well, I'd love to. Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
So the way I look at it is that, well, even in your reference to Christianity, in Buddhism, I think, there is no, you talk about me and God, there is no me. There's only God, basically. There's only this. And I think it's like the first turning is geared towards humans in samsara, saying that, and all we can really do is try to create the right causes and conditions for us to awaken, because awakening's already here. So it's for us to be able to see through the illusion. And all of the practices, like the prostrations and the bodhisattva visualizations, they're all in that effort to create the right causes and conditions for us to be able to awaken.
That's the way to put it. Yeah.
So
Yeah,
that's kind of the way
I don't know how much time I have left, but I want to make one announcement first, and that is I am going to give this class that I've been giving again. I'll start May 19th. That's a Saturday for 4 or 5 Saturdays in a row in San Luis. And I think I'll probably put it on Zoom too. So if you're interested in going into more depth on this stuff, by all means, there'll be an announcement that Sangha will send it out.
What's the title of?
3 Turnings of the Wheel. Yeah. Okay, go ahead, Julie.
Oh, I just wanted to say, when I was practicing at Kenzionji Zen Temple, they, when you first walk in, it's like, well, what's going on here? What do we do? And they said, we bow to the Roshi, we bow to each other, we bow to rocks, we bow to
everything. Yeah.
we bow to dogs,
Yeah, right.
everything, because
pushing,
they're
yeah.
acknowledging the Buddha in all things, and so you bow to everything. Wow, here's you just bow to, and you get crazy with it, and it feels so good, but it's not. And so you go and you're bowing to this and that, and you're not bowing to anything. It's just a celebration, and it feels so good because it's not, that you're bowing to green Torah and this and that. It's
Yeah, Americans don't like to bow. It's like, yeah.
you bow to everything.
My thought was that when I was in Zen, I always thought if it moves, bow to it.
Yeah, if it doesn't move back to
Yeah, you bow to your cushion before you sit on it.
plants,
Because
the earth, dogs.
it's an attitude of respect. So
Respect.
I respect this cushion because you're supporting me in my quest for liberation. It's an attitude that you're cultivating. And it's a very it rubs against our American way, but it's very profound. As you say, it's joyous to say.
That's more respectful than a fist bump or a high five.
Yeah. We're all about what we're pissed off about here, being American.
Well, James, I want to say thank you so much.
Really,
for this talk.
Thank
And
you.
we'd love to have you back.
Sure, anytime.
you.
You can call.
I'm glad that you're going to be sending out the thing about your class that could either be in person or on Zoom.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yes. Mhm.
And so right now, what we usually do is